Hello once again. We resume our studies in the book known as the Gospel of Mark by looking at chapter 10, verses 32 to 45. So let me begin by reading this section of Mark's account of Jesus' life. Mark tells us that they were on their way up to Jerusalem with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished while those who followed were afraid. Again he took the 12 aside and told them what was going to happen to him. "We're going up to Jerusalem," he said, "and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him and kill him. 3 days later he will rise." Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. "Teacher," they said, "we want to do you to do for us what we ask." "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. They replied, "Let one of us sit at your right hand and the other at your left in your glory." "You don't know what you're asking," Jesus said. "Can you drink the cup I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with?" "We can," they answered. Jesus said to them, "You will drink the cup I drink, and be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared." When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be a slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Jesus had already told his disciples on 2 previous occasions that he was going to be martyred. Here he gives his third and most detailed statement of the events that would accompany the end of his time on earth. There could be no mistaking his belief that very dark days lay before him and his disciples, even if he accompanied his comments with the unbelievable prediction that he would come back to life. Meanwhile, we've already discovered that after offering evidence through his teaching and miracles of who he is, Jesus is now concentrating his teaching on his little band of followers, and what following him will actually entail, both for them and for those of us who today may be considering becoming his disciples or have pledged to follow him. However, what becomes clear is that despite all he was sharing with them, and not least his comments about the dark shadow that loomed ahead of them all, they were very slow, as we say today, to get it. So immediately after this third prediction Jesus gives of his coming suffering and death, the disciples show how they have completely failed to understand what true discipleship means. But lest we become smug, it's very easy for us to make exactly the same mistake. The first point that this passage makes, therefore, is that it teaches us that if we want to share Jesus' glory, we must be prepared to suffer with him. Now, James and John had understood some of what Jesus had taught. They realized he was the promised Messiah, and they were probably ready for the suffering that might be associated with any uprising that would make Jesus king. So they may well have felt that they had a right to make their request to have a special place in his kingdom. After all, they were members with Peter of Jesus' inner circle of friends. John had a special place in Jesus' affections, and they were probably Jesus' cousins. On this, incidentally, compare Matthew 27:56, Mark 15:40, and John 19:25. But to live and even die misunderstood, rejected, suspected of having been condemned by God and overwhelmed with calamity, exiled and martyred, that was not what they had in mind. It was, however, what they were to experience, as the rest of the New Testament writings demonstrate. Yet even then Jesus tells them that they might not get what they asked. So what about us? Too easily we can think that if we follow Jesus, we have a claim on his favour. Sometimes too we may be willing for a short, sharp experience of trial in which we can gloriously bask afterwards. But not this. Surely not. But there's another lesson. Too easily we can criticize others for the very thing we desire ourselves. The other 10 disciples were indignant with James and John. However, their anger was not directed at their lack of sensitivity or their selfishness. As Jesus realized, they were angry because the 2 disciples were trying to claim what they all wanted for themselves. It is then easy to criticize the self-seeking of others. But how often the plank remains in our own eye. The very things we see in others are all too often the faults that others see most prominently in us. We must beware above all, for the desire for glory and power. To do so is to fail entirely to grasp the nature of Jesus' kingdom. So in his teaching here, Jesus reminds both those who are his disciples and those who are considering following him that if we want to be great, we must become the slaves of all. Doubtless with a touch of irony, Jesus shows how the great in the world are preoccupied with power and status, and that this is seen supremely in lording it over those they consider lesser men and women, and looking for and receiving their applause. Emphatically, not so with you. Jesus turns the world standards upside down. Service of all others while claiming no personal rights is the only path to true greatness in Jesus' kingdom. To die to ourselves is the labour of a lifetime. The constant battering we receive from worldly values makes it so difficult to spot and to root out our own selfishness. How quickly we think of our rights, how difficult it is to ignore the slights and criticisms of others, how difficult to put others first. But, and this is surely the point here, Jesus does not ask of us what he has not first been ready to offer himself. Even he did not claim his rights, and he was willing to spend his life in the service of others, and in the most painful of circumstances, to face martyrdom for his friends. Yet, and this is the challenge, if he has been willing to do this for us, then surely we should be willing to become the sort of disciples who alone have a right to enter his kingdom.